The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling glass of the penthouse, turning the panoramic view of the city into a blurred watercolor of gray and electric neon. Inside, the silence was heavy, pressurized, like the air inside a submarine deep underwater. Minho sat behind his expansive mahogany desk, the surface cluttered with documents that could topple governments and financial ledgers that detailed the dark underbelly of the shipping industry. He was a man who had built an empire on the ruins of his father's failures, a man who had learned the hard way that a smile was often just a baring of teeth before the bite. To the outside world, he was an untouchable tycoon, a prince of industry with a reputation for ruthlessness. To his enemies, he was a ghost who struck without warning. But tonight, he was simply a tired man consumed by paranoia. His head throbbed with a migraine that had been building since the board meeting 3 days ago, a relentless drumbeat behind his eyes. He rubbed his temples, his fingers brushing against the cold steel of the watch on his wrist, a Patek Philippe worth more than the building across the street. He unclasped it, the metal clinking sharply against the wood, and set it down next to a thick, unsealed envelope of cash. It was a trap. It was always a trap. Minho's eyes flickered to the surveillance monitor embedded in the surface of his desk. On the screen, a figure moved through the hallway. It was the new maid, Kemi. She had been with the household for 3 weeks, a placement from a high-end agency that swore by her discretion, yet Minho trusted no one. The last, discreet, housekeeper had been planting listening devices for a rival syndicate. This new woman, Kemi, was an anomaly. She was 25, with skin the color of deep obsidian and a grace that seemed out of place in a service uniform. Her dark blue dress was immaculate, pressed to a military standard, and she moved with a quiet efficiency that unnerved him. She was too perfect, too silent. In Minho's world, silence usually meant someone was hiding something. He watched her on the screen as she adjusted a vase in the hallway, her movements precise, almost rhythmic. She didn't look around. She didn't check her phone. She simply worked. It agitated him. He needed to know if the armor was real or if she was just another vulture waiting for the carcass. He needed to break her facade. He looked at the watch. He looked at the cash. He looked at the half-empty tumbler of whiskey. It was time for the test. He would feign a narcotic sleep, the kind of deep, vulnerable unconsciousness that screamed opportunity to anyone with greed in their heart. He shifted in his leather chair, angling his body to look as though he had collapsed from exhaustion, his head resting on his folded arms, face turned slightly toward the door so he could watch through the slit of his eyelids. He slowed his breathing. 1, 2, 3. He waited for the door to open. He waited for the betrayal he was certain would come. The door handle turned. The sound was a whisper of brass against brass, followed by the soft hydraulic hiss of the heavy door swinging inward. Minho kept his breathing shallow and rhythmic, a perfect imitation of a man deep in the throes of sleep. He didn't move a muscle, though every instinct in his body was coiled tight, ready to spring. He heard the footsteps enter the room. They were incredibly soft, barely registering against the plush Persian rug. Kemi wore soft-soled shoes, a requirement of the job, but even so, most people scuffed their heels or dragged their feet. She did not. She moved like a breeze. Through the curtain of his lashes, the room was a blur of shadows and amber light, but he could sense her presence. She smelled faintly of shea butter and rain, a clean, grounding scent that cut through the sterile aroma of leather and expensive alcohol. He felt her stop. She was standing in front of the desk. This was the moment. The bait was laid out in plain sight. The watch gleamed under the desk lamp. The envelope of cash was thick enough to be tempting, the flap loosely tucked in so the currency was visible. A thief would take it all. A spy would photograph the documents under his elbow. A curious worker would at least lean in to read the names on the files. Minho counted the seconds in his head. 1, 2, 3, 4. Why wasn't she moving? The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. He expected the rustle of paper. He expected the click of a phone camera. Instead, he heard a soft sigh, not of greed, but of something else, something that sounded dangerously like pity. Minho felt a shift in the air pressure near him. She was moving closer. His heart hammered against his ribs, a traitorous drum in the quiet room. He prepared to grab her wrist, to twist it behind her back, and demand to know who sent her. He imagined the interrogation, the cold satisfaction of being right. But then, the movement stopped. She wasn't reaching for the watch. She wasn't reaching for the money. The shadow of her hand passed over the desk lamp. The harsh, glaring light that had been beating down on his closed eyelids suddenly vanished, replaced by a soft, diffused glow. She had tilted the shade away from his face. The relief to his migraine was instantaneous, a physical cooling of the fire in his brain.
Minho froze.
This was not the script. This was not the sequence of events he had calculated. He remained perfectly still, his mind racing to reevaluate the threat level. Then, he felt a gentle tug at the sleeve of his suit jacket. Her fingers were cool and dry. She wasn't checking his pockets. She was carefully, painstakingly lifting his arm to slide a coaster under the condensation-slicked whiskey glass he had left perilously close to his elbow. She did it with the focus of a bomb disposal expert, ensuring not a single drop spilled, ensuring the glass didn't make a sound against the wood.
Why?
Why would she care about a water ring on a desk he owned? Why would she dim the light for a man she barely knew? Then came the moment that shattered his defenses completely. He heard the rustle of fabric, but it wasn't coming from the desk. It was coming from her own person. He risked opening his eyes a fraction of a millimeter more. Kemi was unbuttoning the thick, knitted cardigan she wore over her uniform, a personal item, likely meant to guard against the aggressive air conditioning of the penthouse. She slipped it off, revealing her bare arms to the chill of the room. With a movement that was almost reverent, she stepped around the desk. She didn't look at the confidential files. She didn't even glance at the gold watch that could pay her salary for 5 years. She leaned over him, and for a split second, Minho braced for a weapon. But what descended on his shoulders was warmth. She draped her own cardigan over him, tucking the edges around his shoulders with a terrifying gentleness. It was a gesture of such intimate, maternal care that Minho forgot to breathe. She treated him not as an employer, not as a target, and not as a monster. She treated him as a human being who was cold. She paused for a moment, her hand hovering near his hair, a hesitation that spoke of a desire to comfort that she couldn't quite act on. Then she pulled back. "Rest well, sir," she whispered into the empty room. Her voice was low, a rich contralto that vibrated in the air long after she turned away. She picked up the empty coffee cup from the corner of the desk, the only reason she had entered in the first place, and walked out, closing the door with the same impossible silence. Minho remained slumped on the desk for a long time after the latch clicked shut. The scent of shea butter lingered, now mixed with the faint warmth of the wool cardigan draped over his shoulders. He slowly sat up, the fabric sliding down his back. He stared at it. It was a simple thing, gray and slightly worn at the cuffs, clearly well-loved. It was the only thing she had to give, and she had given it to him. He looked at the watch, untouched. He looked at the money, ignored. He looked at the documents, unread. He felt a strange, foreign sensation in his chest, a tightness that had nothing to do with the migraine. It was shame. A hot, prickling shame that started at the back of his neck and spread through his limbs. He had set a trap for a rat and had caught a dove. He pushed the chair back and stood up, the cardigan clutched in his hand like evidence from a crime scene. He walked to the window, looking out at the rain again, but the city looked different now. The cynicism that usually armored his heart had a hairline fracture in it. He pressed the intercom button on his desk, the line connecting directly to the security room in the basement. "Jean," Minho said, his voice raspy. "Boss." The response was immediate, sharp. "Did she take it? I have the team ready to intercept." "No," Minho said, staring at his reflection in the dark glass. "She didn't take anything." "Nothing? Did she read the files?" "She didn't look at them." "Then what did she do in there for 3 minutes?" Jean asked, his voice laced with the eternal suspicion that kept them both alive. Minho looked down at the gray wool in his hand. "She covered me. Because it was cold." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. In their world, kindness was usually a currency used to buy leverage. Pure, uncalculated altruism was a myth. "Boss," Jean said slowly, "that's a strategy. She's playing the long game. She wants you to trust her, so she can take something bigger later. It's the classic honey trap, without the honey. Maybe, Minho said, though the word felt hollow. Or maybe we are just broken men who have forgotten what decency looks like. I'll keep the surveillance level high, Jean insisted. Background checks came back clean, but everyone has a price. Everyone. Keep watching, Minho ordered, but his tone lacked its usual bite. But Jean? Do not intervene unless she touches something that matters. And turn the heat up in the penthouse. It's freezing in here. The next morning, the dynamic in the house had shifted, though only Minho could feel the tectonic plates moving. He sat at the long marble dining table, a single place setting at the head, surrounded by empty chairs. The morning light was harsh, bouncing off the polished surfaces of the quiet luxury that imprisoned him. Kemi entered from the kitchen, carrying a silver tray with his breakfast, black coffee, steamed rice, grilled fish. She wore the uniform, the same dark blue dress that made her blend into the shadows of the house, but she wasn't wearing her cardigan. She placed the tray down with precision, her eyes lowered out of respect. Minho watched her hands. They were steady, strong, hands that worked hard. He noticed a small band-aid on her pinky finger, likely a cut from chopping vegetables. "Good morning, sir," she said, stepping back to fade into the wall. Minho didn't pick up his chopsticks. "You forgot something," he said. The air in the room went still. This was usually how accusations began. Kemi blinked, her gaze darting to the tray. "I apologize, sir. Is the coffee not hot?" "I can." "Not the food," Minho interrupted. He reached onto the empty chair beside him and picked up the gray cardigan. He held it out to her. Kemi's eyes widened. For the first time, he saw her composure slip. A flush of embarrassment, or perhaps fear, darkened her cheeks. She stepped forward hesitantly. I thought you were asleep, sir." The room was cold. "I didn't mean to overstep." "You didn't," Minho said. He watched her take the sweater, her fingers brushing his for a fraction of a second. An electric shock, subtle but undeniable, traveled up his arm. "Thank you." The words felt heavy and awkward in his mouth, like a language he hadn't spoken in years. Kemi looked at him then, really looked at him, her dark eyes searching his face. She didn't smile. That would have been unprofessional, but her expression softened. "You're welcome, sir." "Kemi," he said, testing the name. "Yes, sir?" "Why didn't you take the watch?" The question slipped out before he could stop it. It was a mistake. It revealed he had been awake. It revealed the test. Kemi paused, clutching the cardigan to her chest. She didn't look shocked that he had been testing her. Perhaps she expected men like him to test everyone. She looked thoughtful. "My father used to have a watch like that," she said quietly. "He worked in a factory for 30 years to buy a knockoff version of it. He was proud of it because he earned it." She looked Minho dead in the eye, a breach of protocol that somehow felt like a privilege. "I don't touch things I haven't earned. And I don't take things from people who are sleeping. That isn't who I am." She turned and walked back toward the kitchen, her spine straight, her dignity filling the room more than his wealth ever could. Minho watched her go, the coffee getting cold in front of him. He realized then that Jean was wrong. She wasn't playing a game. She was simply playing by a set of rules that Minho had discarded long ago. And that made her the most dangerous person in his life, because she was the only one he couldn't predict. Over the next week, the penthouse became a stage for a silent, observational dance. Minho stopped leaving obvious traps. The piles of cash disappeared, the watches were locked away, not because he didn't trust her, but because he felt foolish insulting her integrity with them. Instead, he began to watch her for different reasons. He watched how she paused to look at the rain, how she carefully dusted the photographs of his parents without moving them an inch from their original spots. He noticed that she never took the leftover food that the staff was allowed to have. She brought her own lunch in a small plastic container. One afternoon, he found himself in the security room with Jean, staring at the wall of monitors. "She's eating rice and vegetables again," Jean muttered, zooming in on the camera feed of the staff break room. "We throw away steak and lobster every night. Why doesn't she take a plate? Everyone else does." "Pride," Minho said softly. "Or preference." "It's suspicious," Jean argued. "She's too clean. Nobody is this clean." I dug deeper into her file. She sends almost all her earnings back to a distinct account. An orphanage? A debt collector? It's hidden behind a few layers. Leave it, Minho ordered, surprising himself. It's her money. She earns it. Boss, if she's in debt, she's vulnerable. Vulnerable people can be bought. She isn't vulnerable, Minho corrected, his eyes fixed on the screen where Kemi was reading a worn paperback book during her break. She's disciplined. There is a difference. He left the security room and walked toward the library, knowing she would be cleaning there soon. He wanted to see her. He told himself it was to maintain the employer-employee rapport, to ensure the household ran smoothly. But he knew it was because the penthouse felt empty when she was in the room. He found her polishing the long oak table, the rhythmic swish of the cloth the only sound. "Do you like to read?" he asked from the doorway. Kemi jumped slightly, then turned and bowed. "Yes, sir. When I have time." Minho walked to the shelves and pulled down a first edition of a classic, a book worth thousands. He held it out. "You can borrow this, if you like." It was another test, but different this time. It wasn't a test of honesty. It was a test of trust. He was offering her something he valued, waiting to see if she would accept the connection. Kemi looked at the book, then at him. Her eyes were guarded. "I couldn't, sir. It looks expensive. If I damaged it." "It's a book," Minho said. "Books are meant to be read, not hoarded. Take it." She hesitated, then reached out. Her hands were rougher than his, the skin dry from cleaning detergents. As she took the book, she didn't just grab it. She cradled it. "Thank you, Minho SSI," she whispered, slipping into the Korean honorific naturally. It was the first time she had used his name. It sounded like a secret code between them. Minho felt a crack in the ice around his heart widen. He was in trouble. He was in deep, terrible trouble. Because for the first time in 10 years, he didn't want to be the boss who commanded the room. He wanted to be the man who deserved the blanket. The library became their sanctuary, a demilitarized zone in the silent war that Minho waged against the world. For weeks, the dynamic shifted with the subtlety of a glacier moving, imperceptible in the moment, but landscape-altering over time. Minho found himself returning home earlier, the neon allure of the city's nightlife losing its grip on him. He would find Kemi there, dusting the upper shelves or organizing the vast collection of vinyl records he rarely touched. She had finished the first book he lent her and had returned it with a small note tucked inside, written in elegant, looped cursive, thanking him for the escape it provided. He kept the note. It was currently sitting in the breast pocket of his tailored suit, resting against his heart like a talisman. One evening, the rain returned, lashing against the windows with renewed fury. Minho sat in his armchair, a glass of water replacing his usual whiskey, watching Kemi carefully polish the brass lamp near the window. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was companionable, a shared frequency that excluded the violence of his business and the hierarchy of his household. He noticed the way the lamp's light caught the high curve of her cheekbone and the steady, calm focus in her eyes. She was a woman who found dignity in labor, but Minho was beginning to see that her spirit was too vast for the uniform she wore. He cleared his throat, the sound startlingly loud. "What did you think of the ending?" he asked, referring to the novel. Kemi stopped her work, turning to him with that now familiar mixture of respect and guarded curiosity. "I thought it was sad, sir," she said softly. He waited too long to speak. By the time he was brave enough, the season had changed. Minho looked at her, really looked at her, and felt a phantom ache in his chest. "Cowardice comes in many forms," he replied, his voice low. "Sometimes silence is the greatest cowardice of all." Kemi held his gaze for a second longer than was proper. "And sometimes," she countered gently, "silence is the only shield we have." It was a moment of terrifying clarity for Minho. He realized he didn't just admire her integrity, he was captivated by her mind. He wanted to cross the room. He wanted to take the polishing cloth from her hand and tell her that she didn't have to shield herself from him. But the chasm of their stations was wide, and he was terrified that if he tried to build a bridge, he would only drag her down into his darkness. So he stayed in the chair, gripping the armrests, contenting himself with the sight of her, a beautiful, unreachable star in his orbit. The fragile peace of the penthouse was shattered on a Friday night, the night of the annual syndicate gala. It was an event Minho could not avoid, a display of power and alliances where attendance was mandatory for survival. The penthouse was transformed from a quiet sanctuary into a bustling stage for the city's elite. Waiters in white coats swarmed the floor, and a string quartet played in the corner, the music barely audible over the roar of conversation and the clinking of crystal. Kemi was assigned to the coat check and service support, keeping her on the periphery, which Minho had personally arranged to keep her away from the prying, predatory eyes of his associates. However, chaos has a way of finding the innocent. Among the guests was Chiron, the daughter of a rival shipping magnate, a woman whose beauty was as sharp and cold as a diamond, and who had long harbored a bitter resentment toward Minho for rejecting a marriage alliance years prior. She swept through the room in a gown that cost more than Kemi would earn in a lifetime, her eyes scanning for weaknesses. When the evening was winding down, and the air was thick with cigar smoke and fatigue, a shrill scream cut through the music. Chiron stood near the hallway, clutching her wrist, her face a mask of performative horror. "My bracelet," she shrieked, the room falling into a hush. "The emerald cuff. It's gone." Her eyes darted around the room before locking onto Kemi, who was quietly collecting empty glasses from a side table near where Chiron had been standing moments before. "You." Chiron pointed a manicured finger, the accusation flying like a dagger. "She was hovering around me all night. I felt her brush against me." The room turned. Dozens of eyes, cold and judgment-filled, landed on Kemi. Kemi froze, the tray in her hands trembling slightly, but she did not drop it. She stood tall, her face composed, though Minho could see the terror vibrating in the tension of her jaw. "I did not touch you, ma'am," Kemi said, her voice steady but quiet. "I have not taken anything." Chiron laughed, a cruel, brittle sound. "That's what they all say. The help always has sticky fingers. Look at her. Look at where she comes from. She probably has a dozen starving relatives waiting for a payout." The insult was not just personal, it was racial, classist, and designed to dehumanize. The air in the room grew toxic. Minho, who had been across the room speaking with a senator, felt a cold rage flood his veins, colder than any ice, sharper than any blade. He set his glass down. The sound of the heavy crystal hitting the table echoed like a gunshot. Minho moved through the crowd, the sea of wealthy bodies parting for him as if he were Moses. He didn't look at Chiron. He looked only at Kemi. She was standing alone, isolated in a circle of accusation, clutching the tray like a shield. She looked ready to endure this, resigned to the fact that the world was unfair. That resignation broke Minho's heart more than her fear would have. He stepped into the circle, placing himself directly between Kemi and Chiron, his back to the accuser. "Are you all right?" he asked Kemi, his voice ignoring the room, ignoring the guests, focused entirely on her. Kemi looked up at him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I didn't take it, Minho SSI," she whispered, the honorific slipping out in her distress. "I know," he said. He turned slowly to face Chiron. His expression was terrifyingly blank. "You are accusing a member of my household of theft," he stated, his voice devoid of inflection. "In my home." Without proof, Chiron faltered, sensing the danger radiating from him, but her pride pushed her forward. "The proof is that it's gone. Search her. If she has nothing to hide, let security strip search her right now." The crowd murmured in agreement, the bloodlust of the wealthy hungry for a spectacle. Jean, the head of security, stepped forward uncertainly, looking to Minho for a command. Kemi began to set the tray down, her hands shaking, preparing to submit to the humiliation to save her job. "I will allow it," she said, her voice breaking. "If it proves my innocence." "No." Minho's voice cracked like a whip. He stepped closer to Chiron, towering over her. "No one touches her. Not a single person in this room touches her." He reached into his own pocket, not to retrieve the bracelet, but to retrieve his phone. He tapped the screen and held it up. It was a live feed from the hallway security camera, rewound 2 minutes. The footage clearly showed Chiron unclasping the bracelet herself, slipping it into her own clutch purse, and then walking into the room to stage the scene. A gasp rippled through the crowd. "You are bored," Minho said, his voice dripping with disdain. "You wanted drama. You wanted to hurt someone you view as beneath you to make yourself feel tall." He stepped closer, invading her personal space. "But she is not beneath you, Chiron. She has more honor in her little finger than you have in your entire lineage. He gestured to the door. Get out. And take your friends with you. The party is over. The exodus was swift and awkward. The guests, sensing the volatility of their host, scattered like roaches when the lights turn on. Within 20 minutes, the penthouse was silent again, save for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant city noise. The staff retreated to the kitchens, sensing this was a moment for the master of the house to handle alone. Minho found Kemi on the balcony, staring out at the skyline. The rain had stopped, leaving the air crisp and cold. She was hugging her arms, shivering, not from the temperature, but from the adrenaline crash. Minho walked out, taking off his suit jacket as he moved. He didn't ask permission this time. He simply draped it over her shoulders, enclosing her in his warmth, the silk lining still holding the heat of his body. She didn't pull away. She leaned into the railing, her head bowing. Thank you, she whispered. You didn't have to do that. You made enemies tonight. I made the right enemies, Minho replied, standing beside her, close enough that their arms brushed. I should have done it sooner. He turned to face her, his hand reaching out to hesitate near her elbow. Kemi, why do you need the money? The agency said you send everything away. Is it debt? Kemi looked at him, her defenses finally crumbling under the weight of his kindness. My sister, she confessed, the words spilling out. She is sick. Back home. The treatment is expensive. I am the only one who can work. That is why I can't lose this job. That is why I swallow my pride. She looked up at him, tears finally spilling over. I am not a thief, Minho. I am just a sister who is afraid. Minho felt a crushing weight in his chest, a mixture of immense respect and a desire to burn down the world that had frightened her. He reached out, his thumb gently brushing the tear from her cheek. His skin was rough against hers, a contrast of textures that felt electric. You are not a thief, he murmured. You are the only honest thing in my life. He stepped closer, his body shielding her from the wind. Your sister. She will be taken care of. Tonight. I will have Jean arrange the transfer. Not as a loan. Not as charity. But because you have saved me in ways you don't understand. The distance between them vanished in the days that followed, replaced by a quiet, burning intensity. It was a romance devoid of grand, sweeping physical gestures, but saturated with emotional intimacy. Minho no longer ate alone. He insisted she sit with him for tea in the afternoons, under the guise of discussing household matters that quickly turned into discussions about philosophy, childhood, and dreams. He learned she wanted to be an architect, that she looked at buildings and saw the bones of them, the way they held people. He saw the sketches in her notebook, complex and beautiful structures that proved her genius was being wasted on polishing his floors. The tension in the house wasn't fear anymore. It was the magnetic pull of two people who desperately wanted to be together, but were bound by professional lines. One evening in the library, Minho broke the line. He placed a document on the table in front of her. It wasn't a contract for cleaning. It was an admission letter to the most prestigious architecture program in the city, fully paid, with a stipend that covered her living expenses and her sister's medical bills. Kemi stared at the paper, her hands covering her mouth. I can't accept this, she gasped. This is too much. I can't be bought. It is not a purchase, Minho said, his voice fierce. He walked around the desk and stood before her, taking her hands in his. It was the boldest he had ever been. He held her calloused fingers in his smooth palms, a union of two different worlds. I am not paying you to stay, Kemi. I am paying for you to leave. She looked up, confused and hurt. You want me to leave? I want you to be free, he corrected, his voice cracking with the effort of letting her go. I cannot keep you here, serving me, wearing that uniform, while I know what is in your mind. It is a crime against who you are. Go. Learn. Build your skyscrapers, he squeezed her hands. And when you are standing on your own feet, when you are my equal in the eyes of this stupid, blind world, then come back. If you want it, Kemi looked at him, the tears flowing freely now. She understood. He was breaking his own heart to ensure she didn't have to break hers to be with him. She raised his hand to her cheek, pressing her face against his palm. I will come back, she promised, her voice a vow. I will build a door that leads straight to you. 2 years passed. The The penthouse remained the same, a glass fortress above the clouds, but the silence inside was different now. It was a waiting silence. Minho had kept his word. He had watched her from afar, never interfering, never checking up on her like a jailer, but reading every report of her academic success with a pride that bordered on paternal, yet burned with a lover's patience. He had changed too. The syndicate was legitimizing, moving into clean energy and construction, guided by a man who no longer wanted to live in the shadows. On a rainy Tuesday, much like the one where they had first truly met, the intercom buzzed. "Guest in the lobby, sir." Jin's voice came through, sounding amused. "Says she has an appointment," Minho frowned. "I have no appointments. I think you'll want to take this one." Minho stood up, his heart doing a strange, forgotten flutter in his chest. He walked to the elevator doors, which opened directly into the penthouse. He smoothed his suit jacket, checking his reflection. He looked older, tired, but softer. The bell dinged. The doors slid open. Kemi stood there. She was not wearing the dark blue uniform. She was wearing a structured cream coat, elegant and professional, holding a portfolio case. Her hair was styled differently, commanding and chic. She looked like a woman who owned the room. But when she saw him, the professional mask slipped, and the warmth of the girl who had covered him with a cardigan flooded her face. She stepped into the room, the click of her heels sharp and confident. She stopped exactly where she had stood that first night, in front of his desk. She didn't say a word. She simply reached into her bag and pulled out a small box. She placed it on the desk. Inside was a watch, simple, elegant, bought with her own money. "I earned it," she said, her smile breaking like sunrise. "And I thought you might be cold," Minho laughed, a sound that released 2 years of held breath. He walked around the desk, ignoring the watch, ignoring the space, and stopped inches from her. He didn't touch her, not yet. He just breathed her in shea butter and rain. And now, success. "Welcome home, Kemi," he whispered. She closed the gap, resting her forehead against his, her hands coming up to grip the lapels of his jacket. "I told you," she murmured, her eyes closing as his arms finally wrapped around her waist to pull her in. "I don't break my promises." Outside, the rain washed the city clean, but inside, there was only warmth.